Welcome to the Sikha this week in Project Lakutei Sichos. We're going to be learning Sikha on Vayishlach in Chelik Yud on page 109. V'parsha seinu misuper asher Esav lokach es noshav vayelech al eretz mipnei Yaakov Achiv. Towards the end of the parsha this week, it talks about Esav, and it tells us that Esav took his wife, his children, and everything he owned, and he went to a different land because Yaakov was there. In the next pasuk it explains the reason. Their possessions were too much to be able to live together. And the land couldn't contain them because of all of their cattle. That the land couldn't contain them. Mefarish and Rashi explains, Lahaspik mire lebehemis shalahem. The land did not have enough to provide the pasture, the food for the animals. Then Rashi brings a second pshat, Mipnei Yaakov Achiv v'chulekid l'kaman sif beis, which the Rebbe will address in the next sif. But first the Rebbe will explain here the first pshat of Rashi. Kavanas Rashi b'pirushehi ledas mefarshim. According to the mefarshim, what Rashi is coming to clarify here is as follows. The pasuk says the land couldn't contain them or couldn't hold them. Loses. Usually you talk about holding something or carrying something because of its heaviness, but that doesn't apply to a land. So how does the word loses come into this pasuk? What's the interpretation of this word? The word loses here does not mean to hold, to contain, rather it means to provide, to support enough for the food for the animals. That there wasn't enough available for the needs of what they need, the food for the animals. That's the simple pshat of this Rashi that the Rebbe brings here from the Ra'am. However, this needs to be understood. Aleph. If Rashi is here to explain these words, and he's translating that it means to provide enough food for the animals, so those are the words that Rashi should be quoting from the pasuk, and not the words which Rashi is not explaining at all. What is Rashi letting me know here that I wouldn't know without his pshat? It's self-understood. When you're talking about a land, the word losses is not literally to carry, to hold. So the word losses means to provide, to support the enough amount that's needed for food for the animals. There you have the same expression where it talks about Avram and Lot sharing the area there in the land. So Rashi explains the meaning of that there wasn't enough to provide for the food for the animals. And Rashi here explains this a second time. Why? Gimel, another question is, Madua Mishana Rashi Meloshan HaKosav Mipnei Mikneihem. The Torah uses the term Mikneihem, their livestock. V'kaisav lebehemis shalahem. And Rashi says they're animals. Why doesn't Rashi use the term that the pasuk uses? Ve'ein loima sherashi balafarish tevis Mikneihem behemis shalahem. You can't say that Rashi is translating the word Mikneihem that it means animals. Shari Mikneihem nema b'teira kama pam lefneiza. The word Mikneihem is mentioned many times before. V'lepirish Rashi klum. Rashi never translates this word. Rashi himself uses this word. It's a word that has a simple translation. The pasuk there does not use mikneh. Rashi uses it because it's a common word. So here the Torah says mikneyem, and Rashi changes and writes behemis. Why? Another question is what's not understood with the first and simple pshat that Rashi brings, and Rashi brings a second pshat. The second pshat Rashi himself says is a medrash. B'pirusha b'parshas Lech Hanal. In Parshas Lech Lecha, where Rashi brings the pshat of very similar words, v'lo yachla oisam, or v'lo nasa oisam ha'aretz. So there, mistapik Rashi ba'pirish, Rashi just brings the simple pshat, lehoisi achayla lahaspik mira lemikneim, that there wasn't enough for the animals. V'ene maybe pirushim acherim. Rashi doesn't bring any other pshat. Why here does Rashi bring a second pshat? Beis, now let's see what the second pshat of Rashi is. Mamshech Rashi b'pirusha. Rashi continues with Medrash Agoda. In the Medrash it says, Mipnei Yaakov Achiv, he left because of Yaakov his brother. Mipnei Shtar Chayiv shel Gzeiras Kiger Yezaracha. There's a Shtar Chayiv, there's a debt of a decree that the one that's going to inherit this land is going to have to be a stranger in a different place. Kiger Yezaracha was said to Avram Avinu that one of his descendants are going to inherit the land and he's going to have to be a stranger. So therefore, Esav said, "Hamutul al Zareh shel Yitzchak." This Gzeira, and then to come and inherit the land, is going to be by one of the descendants of Yitzchak. So Amar, Esav says, "I'm not interested in this Gzeira. I'm not interested in this inheritance. Eilech li mikan, let me leave from this place. Ein li chelik loy b'matana, shenitna loy ha'aretz hazayis. I'm not interested in not the matana to whom it was given to. V'loy b'piroin hashtar, and I don't have to pay this chayiv, this gzeira, decree, and that's the reason why Esav left. And then Rashi adds, umipnei habusha shemacha b'chayrasei. And also, Esav was embarrassed because of the fact that he sold his b'chayra to Yaakov, so therefore he left out of embarrassment. So here as well, what Rashi says needs to be understood. Aleph, the first question is, Yidua klala shel Rashi b'pirush el Torah. Sha'idiyah hu atzma b'parshas Bereishis. Rashi tells us once and again the klal regarding his pirushim. V'anilei basi el l'pshutai ula'agoda hamiyasheves divrei amikra dova davar alefanav. Whatever Rashi brings is relevant for the pshat of the pasuk and only something which can be fit into the words of the pasuk. The Rashi doesn't just bring medrashim and remazim. And over here in our case, the pshat of the medrash is different than what it says in the pasuk. The pasuk tells us the reason why Esav left, because there was too much cattle and they didn't have enough food. And here Rashi brings a medrash that gives a different reason. Esav wasn't interested in inheriting the land. He didn't want to have the gzeira applied to him, and therefore he left. So how do we fit this with what it says in the simple pshat of the pasuk? Beis l'shayne shel Rashi, Rashi's language. Umipnei abusha chulu. He left because he wasn't interested in inheriting the land, and then Rashi adds because he left out of embarrassment. Umipnei abusha. V'loy kosav v'yeshayim rev'chayetze b'zeh. Rashi does not bring this as a third reason. Kedarke b'chol mokim shemevi pirish chodesh, when he brings a new pshat, so he says v'yeshayim that it's another pshat. So mechiach she'ein zeh pirisheni mimedrash Agoda. So this proves that this is not a second pshat. Lo hisafa ala koidmai. Rashi is adding another detail to the second pshat. V'tzarach lahavin. So we have the question here. Harei inyan v'tam chodesh legamri. This is a totally new reason. Kedemuchach gam b'medrash, as you see in the medrash, shehuva kepirish neisaf, is brought as another pshat. Rabbi Shua ben Levi Omer mipnei abusha, that Esav left out of embarrassment. It's a different opinion, a different pshat. Rashi shinema medrash v'koil shnei taimim yachad. Rashi, however, brings these two reasons that Esav wasn't interested in inheriting the land and that he left out of embarrassment. Rashi brings them together. Why? Gimel kivin sharashi ein mistapik b'zeh b'tam echad u'moisef oitam. So Rashi is not happy with one reason. He brings a second reason as well. Muchach she'ein be'echad mehem levadoi kidei lachriach es Esav la'azav es haaretz. So that seemingly makes it clear that one reason alone is not enough for Esav to leave. The main reason Esav left is because of the shtar chayiv, because he didn't want to inherit the land, he didn't want the gzeira. Rashi brings that reason first before he brings the reason of Esav's embarrassment. So we need to explain here. Why does this reason come first? That's the main reason why Esav left. But yet it's not enough of a reason for him to leave. And we need a second and additional reason because of the embarrassment that he left. So what's the pshat in this? Another question here is the pshat that we're saying here, that he left because he didn't want to inherit the land, he didn't want the gzeira. So why does Esav only leave at this point after Yaakov came back there? It's Israel, he returned from Choron. This Gzeira, or this promise of the Eibishter to Avram, that one of his descendants will inherit the land and there'll be a Gzeira, is known from a long time ago. And in fact, from the time of the birth of Yitzchak, the payment of this Gzeira begins. The time of the Gzeira of Kiger Yizaracha, which is 400 years, starts from the time when Yitzchak is born. So Esav is well aware of this from a long time ago. Why is it only now, when Yaakov comes back from Choron, that Esav leaves because he doesn't want to inherit the land? Hey, another question here is, as an introduction to the pshat that Rashi brings from the Medrash, Rashi quotes from the pasuk, these are words in the previous pasuk. Why does Rashi quote this as an introduction to the Medrash? Vav, the sixth and last question. Rashi. Quoting these words, Mipnei Yaakov Achiv, is actually a contradiction to the pshat that Rashi brings. The pshat that Rashi is quoting from the Medrash is that there's the promise that Hashem tells to Avram Avinu that your descendants will inherit the land and there'll be a gzeira, and this is the reason why Esav leaves. But when it says in the pasuk Mipnei Yaakov Achiv, the pasuk is saying that it's actually because of Yaakov that he left. That Yaakov was making him uncomfortable over here, not because of the Gzeira of Kiger Yizaracha. So why would Rashi quote this part of the pasuk as an introduction to a pshat that he's bringing that's different than the way it seems from these words? So the pshat in this Rashi here is as follows. So basically, what the Rebbe pointed out over here is that really this entire Rashi seems to be completely unnecessary. The pshat in the pasuk is simple and self-understood. Needless to say that the medrash that Rashi brings is unnecessary because it's going against the pshat of the pasuk. So what's the entire Rashi coming to answer? The explanation here is as follows. The pasuk shelufnei zeh nemar, the pasuk before the one where Rashi is explaining that lo yachla eretz mugareim and that Esav left. So what does it say before? Vayikach Esav gomer umefaret, and the pasuk there spells out that he took his entire family. But then it also says ves mikneu, his cattle, ves kol behemtoi, all his animals, ves kol kinyonei asher rochash beretz Canaan, all of his possessions that he acquired in the land. Vayelech aleret, and he went to another land. Ubehemshech lezen nema, and continuing with this, the pasuk says right afterwards. Why did he leave? Ki hayar chusham stam rav misheves yachtav, because of their possessions. That's the translation of rechusham. All of their possessions, it was too much to handle in the same place, and therefore he left. Shebe pashtus. Not so. The simple pshat here would seem koi al kol anem alefneze. This refers to everything that we spoke about before. Mikneu, the cattle, behemtoi, the animals, was kol kinyane asher rochash beretz Canaan. So the pasuk here, when it talks about the fact that Esav left, is not only specifically focusing on the fact that there was all the possessions that were too much over here to be in this place. The simple pshat of the pasuk over here is that we're not only talking about the animals, that is, but we're actually talking about all the possessions. All of their possessions that they had were so much that the land couldn't handle it. We're not focusing specifically on the cattle, on the mideh, on the food for the behemoths. That's not the focus here. It's talking about rechusham, rochash, all of their possessions. Now, if that's the pshat, we would have to explain the pasuk l'chayra. The zeh shakosef mesayim. Then the pasuk concludes and says that why did Esav leave? V'lo yachla eretz mugureim loses Esav mipnei mikneyim. The land, that is, couldn't handle them because of mikneyim. What is mikneyim referring to? If we're going to say that mikneyim here is referring to their cattle, so then how does this connect to what it says before this in the pasuk that we're talking about the fact that the land couldn't handle them because of all of their possessions? We're not talking specifically about the fact that there was not enough food for their cattle. So we would have to say in the simple pshat of the pasuk, shebe pashtus, ein ze inyan chodosh. Over here, when in the end of the pasuk it talks about the cattle, it's not talking about cattle. Kiyim ba behemshech umevayeh zeh shehoyer rechushim rav misheves yachtav. It's a follow-up to what it says right before, that there were too many possessions and therefore they couldn't live here together. And therefore, loikoi al tevas miknei shebepasuk hakaidim. So when it says here that the land couldn't handle them, it's not only referring to the cattle that it speaks about in the previous pasuk. And the pasuk now is only focusing on their cattle, like the pshat is in Parshas Lech Lecha. Kiyim rather, pirushay hu miloshin miknas kesef kol rechusham. The word mikneim here means everything that Esav had acquired, or everything that Esav and Yaakov had acquired, referring to all of their possessions. That's how we would translate the word mikneim. Because the pasuk before says Rechusham Asher Rochash Beretz Canaan, it's talking about the fact that the land couldn't handle all of their possessions, and then it concludes saying that the land couldn't handle Mikneim. So what's the meaning of Mikneim? Simply, you would think it refers to all of their things that they acquired. Upirish Akosov Lo Yachla Eretz Mugareim Losei Seisam. So when the land here, when it says here in the pasuk that the land couldn't handle everything they owned, Hu Shalehoyam Makim Be'eretz Mugareim Lo Hachil. Kol Mashakanu in Bekesef Yaakov Esav, the land did not have any space to handle everything that Yaakov and Esav had acquired, however they acquired it. Heipech the Eretz Rachvas Yadayim Shalufneza, and it wasn't a broad and open, beautiful place to live, similar to the way it's described before in this parsha as well. Then you have an open, broad land to live. So the pasuk over here is not specifically focusing on the cattle. It's Bechlal talking about the possessions, that they each had so many possessions that they acquired for themselves that the land couldn't handle them. That would be the simple flow of these two psukim. However, according to this pshat, there's a great question here in the pasuk, and this is the central question in the pasuk that Rashi will come to address. The land can't handle Yaakov and Esav being together. So that explains that they can't live together here. So if the land can't handle the two of them together, so who should be the one leaving? Why is it Esav the one that picked himself up and left? Seemingly you would think it should be the opposite. Eretz Canaan hoya makim megurish shel Esav. Eretz Canaan was the place where Esav lived there for many years. And he took up residence there for many, many years before Yaakov came along, and that was his place. So if so, so why, when there's not enough place for them to live there, does Esav pick himself up and leave, and not Yaakov? Yaakov is the latecomer. Yaakov is the one that just arrived from Charan. So that's something that's not explained here in the pasuk. The pasuk tells us that they couldn't live together, and Esav picks himself up and leaves. Why Esav? Why not Yaakov? You say that Mizu, the question goes even further. We don't see that Esav, that Yaakov, that is, made any effort to convince Esav to leave. The land couldn't handle them. Esav, on his own initiative, went and took his family and all of his possessions and left. So that's a pella. Why would Esav pick himself up and leave just because they can't live together after he's been living there for so many years? Lataretz to me is not to answer this maitik Rashi esatevis ulayachla eretz mugareyim. So Rashi brings from the pasuk these words that the land couldn't handle them, umafarish. What is the pasuk here saying? Lahaspik mira lebehemis shalahem. That yes, this pasuk is not referring to all of their possessions, but it's referring to the fact that there wasn't enough for their cattle. When it says here that the land couldn't handle enough for Mikneim, what's the meaning of Mikneim? That actually is like in Parshas Lech Lecha. The pshat here is the pasuk now is saying that the land did not have enough for their animals. That's what Rashi is letting us know. V'zui hadgoshes Rashi lebehemis shalahem. So therefore Rashi says behemis, the animals. V'loy lemikneim kebekosov. Rashi does not say mikneim. Lishloil pirish anal de mikneim hu meloshem miknas kesef. Because Rashi wants to negate the pshat that we would have thought that mikneim actually means all of the possessions that they acquired. As the Rebbe pointed out before, that's what would seem the simple flow of the pasuk. We're talking about all of their rechush, all of their possessions. And Rashi here is letting you know that no, that's not the pshat. That in fact, mikneim over here does mean, like it says in Parshas Lech Lecha, that the land did not have enough food for their cattle. Now, why does Rashi say that this is the pshat in the pasuk, even though it doesn't seem to flow with the fact that the pasuk speaks about all of their possessions? Shal pizem move on shahaya liYaakov adifus al Esav shemishum zeh halach Esav b'pnei Yaakov. It's the fact that there wasn't enough food for the cattle. That's the reason why Yaakov stays and Esav leaves, as the Rebbe will explain now. Okay, so this explains over here the simple pshat and what Rashi is trying to do here. The main point that Rashi is coming to clarify in his Rashi over here, as the Rebbe will say in the first pshat and the second pshat, is to explain the fact that Dafke Esav left and not Yaakov. Vahabir, so according to the first pshat, what is the reason why Esav leaves and not Yaakov? The Parshas Vayetze Mesupar Barucha, in Parshas Vayetze it says, the Yaakov Rochash Mispa Otzum Shal Tzayin Umikne Bebeis Lavan. That Yaakov had acquired a tremendous amount of sheep and cattle in the house of Lavan. Vayifritz Ish Ma'oid Ma'oid Tzayin Rabbis. He had a tremendous amount of sheep. Ukepirish Rashi, Paris Verabis Yaisim Mishar Tzayin. That it would multiply more than all the other sheep. So Yaakov, that is, had a tremendous amount of cattle. Masha'enkin Esav, Shenyane Haya, Tzayid, Ishsada, Kolin Yane Sada. Esav was involved in all kinds of things out in the field, working in the field. We don't find anywhere that Esav had specifically a focus on owning a lot of cattle. Yaakov led its Canaan. Yaakov arrives to Eretz Canaan with all of his cattle. So now Yaakov occupied the land with all of his cattle, and he took up the territory with all of his cattle that were using all the food in the area. When it became clear that they can't live together, that should be enough mirah, enough place for all the animals. So Esav realized that Yaakov is the one that's using the land there for his cattle, and the food for the cattle is being used by Yaakov much more. So therefore Rashi says that what the pasuk here is saying is the main reason Esav left. In what area, for what reason would Yaakov have more of an advantage to stay here? And Esav decided to let Yaakov have what he needs here and to pick himself up and leave. Where was Yaakov more than Esav needed this territory? It's for the behemoths. This explains why Esav left and Yaakov stayed. Yaakov needed the land for all of the food that he had available for his animals here. Esav did not need the land for his food, for his animals as much. He was ish sada. He didn't need it for his animals. So therefore he left it for Yaakov to be able to use for himself, and he went to a different place. But if it would be just about all of the possessions, then there would be no reason for Yaakov and Esav. Between the two of them, there would be no reason for Esav to leave more than Yaakov. But since we're talking specifically about the cattle, so Esav came to the realization that Yaakov needs this place more, so he left it for his brother Yaakov. Now move on. So the Rebbe now says, however, it's understood, Rashi can't just stay with the first pshat. Levad to explain the reason why Esav leaves. It's a very big deichik to say that Hanhagas Esav loned mi mekaymayim kol hashaloi, that Esav picks himself up and goes away with all of his possessions because he's such a nice person, because he's such a righteous and good person, that he sees that Yaakov needs this land for his animals more than him. So therefore he decides, I can just go to a different land. After all these years living here, Esav is so righteous and he just picks himself up and takes all of his things and goes away. Yaakov entered into his territory. Esav was living there for many years before Yaakov came back with all of his family from Charan. Another point is, according to the first pshat of Rashi, it's not understood. The word achiv in the pasuk is extra. He left the land because of Yaakov. Why does it have to say that Yaakov is his brother? Rashi. So therefore Rashi brings a second pshat. That Esav left because of the shtar chayv, because he didn't want to inherit the land, he didn't want to experience the gzeira of being a foreigner in a different country, and also because of embarrassment. This explains why it's Esav the one that left and not Yaakov. LeEsav hayu taimim sheyazev es eretz Canaan. Esav had reasons to leave. L'chein kishen is galgalu advarim. When things developed, and v'lo yachla eretz mugareim lasei saisam, and the land couldn't handle both of them, umukhrach echad mehem lahatik meshavai. So now one of them has to leave. Azav Esav v'sa'aretz. So out of the two of them, who's the one that decided to leave? Esav, not because he was such a nice guy, but because he anyways had reasons to leave. So move on. So now we can understand the hamavua b'medrash, the reasons that it gives in the medrash for Esav leaving. It's not at all a contradiction to the simple pshat of the pasuk that Esav leaves because of all of the possessions, and there was too much for them to be together. The pasuk gives the reason why one of them had to leave. And as the pasuk says, they couldn't live together there. So the pasuk gives a reason why they couldn't be together. The Medrash explains another detail. So between the two of them, why is it Esav that left and not Yaakov? And the reason is because Esav anyways had reasons why he eventually wanted to leave. So Rashi brings the words Mipnei Yaakov Achiv of the pasuk before he brings the Medrash. Rashi, what he's emphasizing here is the reasons that Rashi quotes it from the Medrash. It's only coming to explain this detail. Why is it that Esav left and not Yaakov? In general, the reason why someone had to leave, that the pasuk tells you, because they couldn't handle both of them together. But why between the two of them is it Esav that left Mipnei Yaakov Achiv? That has what we see here in this medrash. Rashi might gam tevas Achiv, and Rashi also brings the word Achiv l'rames shal yidei pirish zeh, because that hints to the fact that it's only in the second pshat shtar chayv that there's a shtar chayv that has to be fulfilled by one of the descendants of Avram, one of the children of Yitzchak, either Esav or his brother Yaakov. We understand why the pasuk here is emphasizing the fact that they were brothers, because it's between these two brothers someone has to fulfill the shtar chayv and also the embarrassment that he sold the bechayra, which is hinted by the fact that the Torah says that they were brothers. What it says earlier in the pasuk, that the land couldn't handle the two together, so the fact that it says achiv is really not necessary here. Any two people that have so many possessions, the pasuk, the land wouldn't be able to handle them. It's not necessary to write achiv. Achiv is hinting to the pshat of the medrash. So this explains how the pshat of the medrash is not at all a contradiction to what it says in the pasuk. There are two different things that we're explaining here. We're explaining the fact that it couldn't handle both of them together, so someone has to leave. But then we're explaining why Esav specifically left and not Yaakov. This will explain, so why did Esav not leave a long time before and he only leaves right now? Because of Mefurish Hatam L'Klolis HaMe'ura. It's the pasuk that says clearly what's the reason why this happened, why Esav leaves. It is only at that point which one of them was forced to leave. At this point is sort of where you have a fork in the road and you see who is the one that's going to end up inheriting the land and who will not. It's only at this point when someone is forced out where you see that change. Adas, up until this point, it's still not clear and decisive to us. Mi yishalem hashtar. Who's the one that's going to pay this shtar? Meaning, who's going to have to experience this gzeira? Or maybe it'll be fulfilled by both of them. Af shagar ba'aretz. Because even if you're living in the land, it doesn't mean that you're living there now, that in the future your descendants will inherit the land and that your descendants are going to go to Mitzrayim and be in a strange land. They're living there because they grew up there with their father. So the fact that Esav was living here till now, that doesn't mean that he's going to continue living there and his descendants will continue living there. And the same with Yaakov. It wasn't clear at this point. When it gets to the point that they can't anymore live together like they were living till now in their father's house and sharing the area together. They're too much to handle to live together. And someone has to make that decision to leave. So now they come to that fork in the road where they have to make the decision who's going to be the one to leave. The one that stays, he clarifies his decision, that he's ready to stay. He's the gezerah that applies to him, and his descendants will inherit the land. Therefore, Rashi explains, the land couldn't handle them. So at this point, they can't just continue living there like they did when they grew up in their father's house. Now they have to make a decision, do I want to live there? Do I want to stay here for my descendants? So Azai, Esav makes now the decision, I'm not interested in staying here, I'm not interested in inheriting this land, and I'm not interested in the gezerah either. So, yes, he was living there till now, and till now there was no reason for Esav to pick himself up to leave. He knew that there's the shtar chayiv, and eventually someone will have to leave, but until then he was living comfortably like he was living in his father's house. He grew up there and he stayed there. It gets to the point that someone has to leave, so now a decision has to be made. So Yaakov decides to stay, and Esav decides to leave. Hello. So now the Rebbe will explain why Rashi has to add the idea that Esav left out of his embarrassment. The fact that Esav left because in the future he didn't want to inherit this land, but it still is not enough. Yes, Esav did not want to have anything to do with this shtar chayiv, with the inheritance of the land. Right now, what forces him out is the fact that Yaakov arrived. It's a tremendous embarrassment. The fact is that what is it right now that's causing him to leave? What's forcing him out? The fact that Yaakov, his brother, his younger brother, after many years of him living here, comes to Eretz Yisrael, and the land can't handle both of them living together, and now Esav is forced out. So true, Esav made that decision that he's not interested, but the fact is, isn't this a tremendous embarrassment for Esav to be forced out? How would Esav do this? He can't live here together and he has to leave because of Yaakov. So how does Esav handle such embarrassment and subdue himself to Yaakov to leave? So therefore Rashi adds another detail. And this is not a third pshat, Pirish Acher, ki b'medrash kanal siv beis, ki b'medrash muvam time emele betur Pirish apasik mipnei Yaakov achiv. In the medrash, it's brought as another pshat for why he left because of his brother Yaakov. It's two in the medrash. It's quoted as two different pshatim. Mipnei shtar chayiv, you left because of the shtar chayiv. Mipnei abusha, or another pshat, you left because of embarrassment. When Rashi brings this idea that he left because of embarrassment, he's not coming to explain why it's Esav that left and not Yaakov. In the pshat of the pasuk, this is not the reason. The busha is not the reason that he left. The first reason that we brought is not enough, and therefore Rashi has to bring another detail over here to explain this. But this is not a reason for itself. And what's the reason Rashi brings? That the reason why Yaakov leaves is out of embarrassment. Meaning, Hainu, Shebechlal Haisa Shehi Yaseh Shel Esav Be'eretz Canaan Belula Beherge Shel Busha. Bechlal, Esav being there together with Yaakov was always mixed in with some kind of embarrassment. The fact that this is the individual, this is his brother, his younger brother, that he gave him, he sold him, the Bechayra. So Yaakov being there and Esav together in his presence always brought an embarrassment to Esav. So the fact that he leaves, even though it seems pretty embarrassing that he's subduing himself to his brother and he's leaving, he's being forced out because of his brother. And it's an embarrassment that he's being pushed out because of his brother, but on the other hand, staying there was also an embarrassment for him. So therefore he left. But on the other hand, just the embarrassment, this alone is not a reason for itself that Esav would leave just because of this embarrassment. Rashi brings this just as an addition, as a second reason. The main reason he leaves is because for the future, looking in the bigger picture, Esav made the decision, I'm not interested in inheriting this land, I don't want it for my children, for my descendants. That was the main reason he left. The reason why, how could Esav bring himself to take such a step to leave, even though it's a tremendous embarrassment, because being there was also an embarrassment to some extent. So therefore Esav decided, you know what, it's a good opportunity to just pick myself up and leave. So we understand from everything that it says over here that the main issue that Rashi is coming to address with his pshat here in the pasuk is not the simple pshat where the pasuk explains that they couldn't live together because there wasn't enough space for them. That it says in the pasuk. But the main point over here is, if it can't handle the two of them, why is it Esav that leaves and not Yaakov? And it's actually surprising. Esav lived there for much longer. This was his place. Yaakov was a latecomer. And why is it Esav that is all of a sudden the nice guy that decides to leave? So therefore Rashi explains a different Pirushim, as the Rebbe explained this over here. The first pshat, actually according to the first pshat, it does come out that Esav was a nice guy and he decided that Yaakov needs the land more than me, so he left it for him. But in the second pshat, Rashi explains that Esav made the calculation that for the future I don't want this land as an inheritance for my descendants anyways, and it's an embarrassment for me to be here as it is, so therefore Esav decides to leave and not Yaakov. Omnam l'chayra adayin tzarich bir. There's still one detail that needs to be clarified. Hagzeidet, the ger yiyeh zaracha, this decree that your descendants of Avram will become a stranger in a foreign land, Hamutelas al Zarash Yitzchak, which will happen to one of the descendants of Yitzchak, Hikisiyim Akasav Shiyah Geirim Be'eretz Leilahem, that they will become a stranger in a land that's not theirs. V'lei Be'eretz Mitzrayim Dafka. This doesn't refer specifically or not necessarily Eretz Mitzrayim. U'kemoishe Pirish Rashi Sham, Rashi there says this, V'lei Nema Be'eretz Mitzrayim, doesn't clearly say that they're going to become strangers, foreigners in Eretz Mitzrayim. Elo Leilahem, they're going to wander to a different land, to a country that's not theirs. Ve'im kain, if so, hatokas Esav lahar seir shemichutz la'eretz Canaan, this itself that Esav moves away from the land and he goes to Har Seir, harei zeh atzmai hu priyas hashtar chayv. Can't this itself be Esav now actually fulfilling this shtar chayv by leaving to go to Edom where he went, to Har Seir, and then he'll come back later in the future. Maybe this is the actual fulfillment of the shtar chayv by Esav and by his descendants. So his step of leaving is not necessarily at all showing that he's not interested in being part of this shtar chayv. But the answer here is Hagzeira mutelas al zarash shel Yitzchak hili is ger goyim be'eretz leilahem. The Gzeira is that one of the descendants of Yitzchak is going to leave the country and go to a different country and be there as a foreigner. You're going to be there as a foreigner and never settle there fully. Esav was not interested in being part of this shtar chayv because he didn't want to have to wander into a different country and live there like a foreigner. When Esav moved to Har Seir, Esav lives there and settles there. He settles there comfortably. Esav was not interested in the Gzeira of Golus and then to come and back and inherit the land in Eretz Yisrael. He wanted to be there and settle there in his Golus. Settle there in Har Seir where he is. You want to settle in the Golus where you are, you can't come back to Eretz Yisrael. So that's how we know that Esav's choice to leave Eretz Yisrael and go to Har Seir was not a choice to be a ger, it was a choice to leave the land altogether. This last point is an important lesson for everybody wherever they are in the time of Golus. As long as we are still in Golus, we're in Golus, paying up this shtar chayv, which ultimately extends even now when we're in the time of Golus. Ad bi'esh Mashiach tzidkeinu, until the arrival of Mashiach, sheyilchem l'chemes Hashem, v'yinatzeach, v'yivne beis hamikdash b'mkoimoi, v'achakach yikabetz nitchi Yisrael keitz ha-Golus. When Mashiach will finally gather all the Yidden back into Eretz Yisrael, ala odom ladas lahargish. A person has to know and feel. Shehu ger be'eretz loy loy. You're in a galus. You're in a place, you're a foreigner here, this is not your land. Do not become comfortable and settle, God forbid, in a place of galus where you take up a new residence and this becomes your new country. You always have to remain a stranger and a foreigner to all of the exile things that are in this land that you live in. Aval, on the other hand, the Rebbe points out, Toishav v'chazak v'chol inyani Torah u'mitzvahs. You do have to be settled and very strong in your commitment to fulfilling Torah mitzvahs, which are inyani neshama, the matters of your neshama. Your neshama has never gone into galus. But as far as your guf is concerned, as far as your physical life is concerned, a yid has to always remember, I'm in galus, and this is not a place that I can settle in fully. And a person, a yid, should always await every moment la geula hamitis, to the ultimate redemption, Mashiach tzidkenu, shi'elichenu, kamimias la'artzeinu, b'korev mamish.